Howdy, and welcome to another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I'm your host, Daniel Dolphin.
All right. I think it's going to ask you, like, are you okay with being recorded?
Yeah, I don't. I'm seeing
didn't?
upper left. It says recording, so it didn't.
Okay.
It didn't prompt me, but that's
That's
cool.
all right, huh? All right.
So, do you enjoy the world of technology, or are you like me? I think it's filled with witchcrafts and wizards and sorcery. It's kind of out there to plague us all.
Right. So I am surrounded by people like that, but I'm actually a technology person because I have to use video and editing software and social media all the time. So
Mm-hmm. I was thinking with the Trinity codes that maybe you had a computer background or something, but
well,
yeah,
I didn't go to college for that at all. I decided to learn to write code when I was about 25, 26. So I just went on and bought a couple books at that time and decided to and learned how to write code and build websites and programs and things like that. So I've always been kind of interested in that side of it, and I'm around a lot of people who still have flip phones, So it's
I do too. Yeah.
yeah.
I try to stay about 10 or 15 years behind the curve there. So anyway,
Right. Okay. Yeah.
I did that big DVD deal. By the way, don't let me forget to get your address or if you'll email it to me or something, and I'll
I'll email
send
it
it that. Yeah, and I'm not trying to cram that down your throat. If
No.
you don't care to watch it, no big deal. It's just an offer that I make. But I do have a digital download of it too. So if you're more techie and you'd rather that, then that's simple to do it.
Yeah, that might be simple. Yeah.
But I did all of the stuff to get that video ready. I did all the shooting, the editing. I had over 2,000 hours of editing in it. And then I get to the end and I've got my final thing. And then I realize I have no idea to actually put that on a DVD and make chapters and all of that kind of stuff. So there was a whole other learning curve to it. And the format I had it in was wrong. So I had to go back and change a bunch of stuff. And it's, anyway.
Yeah. Yep. I know how that goes.
Self-learning is a tough process.
Well, and there's nothing about computers that it's ever simple or the same. It's like trailer plugs for lights.
Mm-hmm.
They never make the same one twice. It's like you're going to pick up the neighbor's trailer or borrow some friend's trailer. It's always the wrong plug-in. I don't understand how that works, but it doesn't matter if there's only two of them. It will be the wrong plug-in. So, yeah. Same thing with computers.
I hate updates too. Like I don't know what you edit your videos in, but I use Adobe Premiere Pro. And a couple of years ago, they did a big update, and all of a sudden, stuff isn't in the sub menu that it has been in for the previous 5 years, and now you got to go find it all over again. You're just like, some 22-year-old thought that was a good idea, and whoever the 25-year-old managed them didn't slap them across the face and say no, like they should have, and then 2 million people across the globe are now looking for a feature they've been using for 15 years.
Exactly. And it makes perfect sense to the person who wrote the code. I learned that. It's like writing code and building something. It's kind of the same thing as making a video. You have to understand that when you're shooting something, you understand what's going on, but you have to make sure that somebody else can understand what's going on too. And that's a whole different ballgame.
Absolutely.
Speaking of that, like talking about ranching, I feel a lot of people, they're beginning to show what ranching is, like what we do in ranching, what people do in ranching, but they don't explain it. So it seems cruel if you don't explain it. It seems traumatic to something, to a horse. What we do to horses seems traumatic to them if you don't really understand what the person is doing, what they're teaching the horse or why they're teaching a horse something. So we as creators, we always have to remind ourselves, somebody doesn't know where this is. Somebody doesn't know what this means. So we have to explain it while we're shooting. And that takes a lot of thought process,
Yeah. It does. You do a very good job of it too, making sure that you stop and explain what that word means and so forth. Where you and I would be familiar with it, but somebody in a big city would have no idea what a piggin string is or anything like that.
Exactly.
I'm right there with you. We need more agricultural advocates out there for sure. And if you'll remember, I told you each episode has a fake sponsor. I think you're going to like this one.
Okay.
I usually put it somewhere in the middle, but anyway.
Sounds good.
And by the way, before we get, is that a Ruger that you've got there on the table?
Did I leave that out? I'm sorry. Yeah, that's Ruger. Yes.
Well,
when I first got that, it's a 44 Magnum, and I wanted something to carry for bears, and it's not the best bear gun because it's a single action, so you have to cock it every single time. But it's got a good kick to it. For you got to hang on to a pistol that's a 44 Magnum when you're firing that thing. So
I'm a certified gun nut myself.
And
that's one of those statistics I've heard is that 95% of all 44 Magnums sold have had less than a box of shells shot through them.
I believe
if you're not used to big guns, believe it or not, my wife, she's average size kind of woman. Her personal pistol is a 44 Magnum. It's a Smith & Wesson 686, but it's got 8 3/8 inch barrel and just but it's a sweet shooting gun. And once you learn to manage the recoil of those big guns, they're not that bad. My oldest son, when he was 8, I shoot a 41 Magnum. That's my hunting gun, and I had him shooting that thing with some kind of light loads in it. When he was 8 years old, he'd shoot a full cylinder of it. So
yeah, exactly. And what I think the key is not to fight it, right? Which is a life lesson, right?
Yeah. I always leave an empty cylinder and I'll spin it and close it and then hand whoever the gun. So if you flinch in the middle of this, it's going to be very obvious to everybody.
You're going to know, huh?
Makes you be a little more honest. But anyway.
Absolutely.
Well, I guess I'm not going to edit out any of the talking we've just had, but welcome to Adult Onset Horsemanship. Our guest today is Mr. Trinity Vandenacre of the wonderful state of Montana. I've found Trinity through, I guess, Instagram and YouTube clips. He does a lot of talking about ranching and that kind of stuff. And I think he's a very good advocate, good way of explaining everything, and always has some interesting visuals. Probably half your videos are your horseback and all. And I know how hard it is to shoot video and ride a horse at the same time and carry on a conversation. It's more difficult than most people would realize. So I wanted to have you on and have a chat with you and hopefully enlighten some people as to some of the realities of ranching and all of that stuff, which is right up your alley. So Trinity, we start every podcast with the lightning round questions just to kind of break the ice. So these are going to be a little out of left field.
Okay. Sounds good.
So like I say,
it's
just about, these are 4 points, by the way, which are handed out arbitrarily at the end, and you can win either a genuine compliment or an awkward silence. So that's what you're playing for today. All right.
Okay.
So first question, what is your favorite way to relax?
Watching YouTube.
Okay. Sit back and scrolling through. It's a phenomenal resource of knowledge. It really is. If you want to rebuild the rear end of a 1947 CJ Jeep, there's a guy on there that's got a video showing you just exactly how to do it. It's really a pretty cool medium.
It sure is, yeah.
Morning or evening?
Morning, for sure.
Me too. Bay or sorrel?
I'm a sorrel guy, actually.
Okay. Does pineapple belong on pizza?
Absolutely not. Who thought of that?
One of those.
I mean, I know a lot of people that eat it, but I have no idea why you would ever put pineapple on a pizza. I'm sorry. That's just my opinion.
That's as divisive a line as Democrat or Republican. I mean, people feel very strongly about it. There's no gray area in that question at all.
I agree with you. Mm-hmm.
What is your favorite beverage?
Coffee.
Do you have a favorite brand of coffee? Are you a Black Rifle guy, or I know there's Wyoming Bucket Beans coffee now and all that stuff, or Folgers or what?
You know, I've gone through a lot of different kinds of coffee, and I actually right now the coffee I'm drinking is from Winco. So as long as it's not like a super super strong coffee, like I mean I'm strong like really really dark, like I would say Starbucks is. I don't like the quite that dark because I don't put a lot in it. But so I'm not real picky. I do like the company Black Rifle, absolutely. They're
Sort of stuff that
fantastic.
yeah, I don't think I've ever actually had any of their coffee, but I love watching their ads and everything.
Absolutely.
Would you tell us something unexpected about you?
About me?
Mhm.
Well, I'm a techie cowboy, actually. So when I sit down and watch YouTube, a lot of times it's like a tutorial on how to build a React app with, writing JavaScript code. So you wouldn't necessarily think that when you look at me, but
Mhm.
I just, that's something unusual.
So
At
I'm
least
gonna
people
ask a
think I'm crazy.
No, I could totally see it. There's a lot of stuff going on underneath the surface with most cowboys. We're kind of like ducks. We you see this, but you don't know the feet that are turning underneath that water. Um,
Exactly.
how many coding problems have you had where you weren't quite sure how to get yourself out of this corner you had painted yourself into that you figured out somewhere in the middle of a pasture in a saddle?
Oh,
Does that ever happen?
almost every time. So there's only a couple of times when things really come to you. And it's usually if you're sitting there doing nothing, like feeding hay, driving a pickup somewhere, or sitting in a saddle. That's all of a sudden you go. And the really bad part about that is because you're thinking, oh man, I should try this. And then you can't for the next like 4 hours,
Mhm.
You're like, I think that would work, but you can't get back there to actually attempt it and see if it's going to work.
I'm an absolute addict of the voice recorder on my phone. I have to leave myself notes of those thoughts, or those thoughts are like trying to catch smoke. It just evaporates and I'll never get it again. So
Yeah, that's right. They do leave you very quickly. Yeah.
if you could have any superpower, what superpower would you choose?
Be able to climb hills like a deer. That would be really nice.
Okay.
Hmm.
Do y'all in the part of Montana that you're in, do y'all have like extreme elevation changes, or is it more gradual type, or but you have like cliff faces and stuff where you just can't go that way, or what?
Yes. So most of what we, in the summertime, all the cattle and stuff move up to the high country. So it's all in the mountains, and the Rocky Mountains are very rocky, very steep, lots of timber, lots of places you can't get to. And, you a lot of places you start out at 4,000 feet and going to 8,000 feet, pretty quickly. So
Hmm.
lots of steep country.
Are you a person who is more thoughtful or more of a feely type of a person?
Definitely thoughtful. I
Okay.
So there is no time when my brain is empty. Like I'm sitting there not thinking of something. I'm always thinking about a problem or a solution to some problem that I probably will never even attempt to uh, do or fix or anything, but it's just always mulling around in my head. It's just some new idea or something I want to try or some business idea. Always something. Absolutely.
Hmm.
Which may make me look a little lost sometimes because I'm not really, I don't look like I'm maybe there.
Yeah, I'm pretty famous. My wife makes fun of me all the time. She'll look outside and I'm walking around talking to myself or something like that, and obviously, embroiled in this conversation in my head, and she still hasn't gotten used to it after almost 20 years. But
Yep,
that's
that's right.
just who I am. So, uh, would you say that you are decisive or indecisive?
Decisive.
All right, I like that. That's one of those questions that well, I say that this pattern was broken yesterday on the last podcast I recorded, but indecisive people take 30 seconds to answer that question.
Exactly.
Decisive people answer it right away. And yesterday, I don't know if you're familiar with Jim Masterson of the Masterson method, uh,
No, I'm
body
not.
work type stuff. Anyway, he answered indecisive, but he answered it within like a second and a half. And I told him he was the first indecisive person to ever answer decisively like that. So
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Maybe he's not quite on there. The thing about being decisive is I used to be indecisive, but it was because I was always worried about what would happen if I made the wrong choice. If I had two options and I chose the wrong one, then maybe the other one was the right one, and I'd worry about that all the time. And that really came out of insecurity. And then finally, I just got to the point where I realized you're never going to know what's down that other path anyway. So just let it go. You got to totally let that go and sell yourself out to this whatever decision that you make. It takes a lot of worry off your mind because you can't go back,
Yep. And the real thing that's going to happen isn't one of the 1,000 scenarios that you manufactured in your head anyway, right? You're never going to have figured out what the consequence is. So
yeah, exactly.
Do you have a favorite piece of tack or horse related or cowboy related tool?
I would say that my particular saddle, I just, it's one of the things that's really hard to do without. So I'm just going through all the things on my saddle. I'm thinking it's really hard to do. Like it takes away a lot of your confidence to get on a horse without your saddle. The saddle that I'm used to, the one that fits me the way it gives me confidence because it's familiar. So that would be the biggest one for me.
Okay. What kind of saddle do you ride, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I ride a Wade saddle, but it's made by a guy here in town. This is the second one he made for me. The other one was a little bit too big, and so I shrunk it down, had him make me another one. But it's, I have buck and rolls on it, the rough out seat to kind of give me a little bit more grip. So my dad owns a horse leasing company, and ever since I was little, I've been riding horses that were either young or had problems because that's the ones that I get to ride, right? The ones that, oh, hey, take this one out and see if you can teach it something, figure this out. So it's always a little bit hairy every time you're crawling on one of these things. You never know what you're getting on. And I like a saddle that fits me pretty good, hugs me a little bit. And I don't think I'm the best rider in the world. I've seen a lot of guys who can ride something, doesn't matter what saddle they're in. I don't think that's me. So that makes the saddle matter a little bit more.
I understand exactly where you're coming from on that one. I used to ride bulls and all that kind of stuff, and I've made a career of starting colts and problem horses, and I'm kind of the same way. I don't get bucked off very often, and I don't make near as many of those rides now as what I did when I was younger and knew less. But it's probably not real pretty to watch. I tell people that I learned to ride a bucking horse from that monkey that rides the border collie. It just kind of
right.
Have you ever?
Oh yeah, I've seen that. Absolutely.
Do you have a favorite book or movie that you'd share with us?
I really enjoy the Undaunted Courage book about Lewis and Clark and their expedition out here in the West. I think that's very intriguing just because of all the places that they talk about. I know where they are. I've been there. I know people in those areas. I think it's been really interesting reading that. So that's one of my favorites, I would say.
That is a super cool book. I'll ask you, have you ever, I first heard of that book on another podcast called The University of Badassery. Have you ever heard of that one?
I haven't. No.
They did about 2 podcasts. It's a former Delta Force guy. And
okay.
His kind of co-host is a motivational speaker, metalhead kind of a guy. So they're a bit of an odd couple, but they have some interesting stuff to listen to from time to time. But they did like 2 episodes on that book and talked about it, and it was pretty darn cool, I thought.
Yeah,
particularly
those guys were amazing.
Yeah, the precision, the way they would split up and meet back together 6 months later and have caches of food, and I mean they almost had exactly the amount of materials on a 3-year ordeal, and just the planning that went into that thing is truly incredible, particularly considering what they didn't have at that time to make any of that work, and on a totally exploratory, 3-year journey. And I mean, they did exactly the amount of materials on a 3-year ordeal and just the planning that went into that thing is truly incredible, particularly considering what they didn't have at that time to make any of that work, and on a totally exploratory, 3-year journey. expedition where they don't know what they're going to find or whatever, and they still had planned for every contingency. And the air rifle that they had, you remember that they had like a 40 shot air rifle or something way back when. That just it's pretty mind boggling when you think about it. Do you have a guilty pleasure? You a guy that has to have a Mountain Dew at 10:15 every morning or anything like that? Do you have something like that?
Pizza. That's my problem. So I had, I can handle like going without a lot of different kinds of food, but pizza is a really tough one for me. I really have to have, I can't ever like have pizza in a, the correct amount. Always overdo pizza. Let's just say that.
I got into making pizza here about 6 months ago, and we do a homemade pizza night just about every night of the week. And it took me a while, but now I've got the dough dialed in and all that stuff, and it's a very look forward to night of the week around here.
Well, it's really bad for me with the pizza thing is because I got COVID really bad, and ever since I have COVID, I felt terrible, and come to find out that something in my system now does not like carbs, especially wheat. So I have to stay away from sugar and carbs and then I feel okay. As soon as I have that, I feel feverish and horrible. So when I give in to pizza, I can't do it very often anymore because I pay for it. So that's too bad, man. Too bad.
Yeah. My wife, we've had it 3 times, and
really
she got it. Yeah. I had it 3 times. I think she's had it 2 or 3 times, but it never was really very bad for me. The first time I got it, I was down for 2 or 3 days. And then for like a month, I would have trouble catching my breath doing any little thing. Like I could just walk out to the round pen and I'd feel like I just sprinted 100 yards or something. And that lasted a little while, but the last time she got it, she was down for a couple of weeks. And my wife lives on Diet Dr. Pepper and peanut butter. And ever since she had COVID a year ago, she doesn't like peanut butter anymore. It changed the flavor profile for her, which is like she's a diehard peanut butter person. So that's a real change. We would buy the like, I don't know, 20-pound jar, the massive bucket of peanut butter.
That is so weird, though. I mean, it changed everything. I mean, it's just so strange what it does in like different people. But
yeah, Fauci got our money's worth out of that one, didn't he?
That's for sure.
Do you have a favorite dinosaur or deep sea creature?
A favorite one? Well, I mean, who doesn't like the T-Rex? I mean, that would be my favorite dinosaur.
Do y'all keep chickens up there by chance?
I don't keep chickens. I know too many of my friends keep chickens, so we have plenty of eggs. Yeah, I used to when I was growing up.
You ever think about that scene in Jurassic Park where they shine the light on the pupil of the dinosaur and it constricts down and all? You know the scene I'm talking? That's a chicken's eye. I mean, those are some predators. They are little velociraptors.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
We moved to this place. We moved here 7 or 8 years ago, and we brought our chickens with us. And at that time, we probably had 15 or so. And this place was like the mecca of all frogs on the planet. There were a ton of lizards and frogs and all. And within 2 months, you couldn't find a lizard or a frog anymore. The chickens had just made them extinct around here. So, what were you going to say?
Huh? Yeah.
You were about to say something?
If you hang an apple off of an electric fence, chickens will line up to hit that apple and it will knock them out when they peck it. And when they wake up, they'll just get back in line to do it again. Now, don't ask me how I know this, but it's just, it's random knowledge.
I understand. There are many experiments that a young boy can run if he has an electric fence close enough by. There's a lot of stuff you can learn about life with just one electric fence around.
Exactly.
I don't know if I've told this story on the podcast, but I have to tell it now that we've broke this up. When I was in college, I lived in a really cool house. It had a screened-in back porch that had a bass fishing pond to the west of it, so you could sit on that porch and watch the sunset over the pond. And we were in the middle of a cow pasture, so we had a hot wire fence around the house, basically. So when you drove up, you had to disconnect the gate to get up to the house. My roommate was in the School of Professional Aviation, and he had a bunch of his buddies coming over one evening. And, we were drinking a little beer and all. And I talked one of his buddies into going out and peeing on the hot wire fence. Now, this is a 21-year-old guy that's about to be flying $70 million airplanes around the world, right? So he goes out into the darkness, and I'm just kind of listening for the scream. And it so happens, as he went out there, two more of his friends had come up to the front and had disconnected the gate right at that moment and saved him. But he comes back up onto the porch, and I'm like, well, it's okay that you chickened out. You weren't going to enjoy it anyway. And he's like, man, I peed on the top one, the post, the bottom one. I told him when he peed on it, it would make like sparks. It would, it would be a little light show out there in the dark. But in my opinion, if you're 21 and someone can talk you into peeing on a hot wire fence, you deserve what you get, right?
I figure that's exactly right too. If you're willing to do it, that's kind of your fault.
Life's hard when you're stupid. And have you ever had a UFO encounter?
I have not. No.
Okay. All right. Well, that is all of the short answer questions that we have for today. I'm going to give you a score of 618, which is our high score so far. Good. So you have won your choice of a genuine compliment or an awkward silence. You tell me.
Oh, I love the awkward silence thing. That sounds fantastic.
Let's do it. All right. That was a good one, too. Very nice. People have been picking that more and more lately, and I just absolutely love it. I don't know if there's better anything than that. So, yeah. All right. Well, right. Well, Trinity, now you kind of got the pulse of the way things go around here. Why don't you kind of give us the 30,000 foot view of what it is that you were doing up there in Montana as a video creator and the running of the ranch, just the whole 9 yards.
Well, so I thought it was kind of interesting. I don't know if do you watch Yellowstone at all?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I wouldn't say that Yellowstone is a very good representation, especially up till this season, of anything that we have to, really Montana's about. But the ideas that are behind that they put into the show, the ideas that these guys are dealing with are really front and center in real life Montana. So the fact that people are trying to hold on to their land against the encroachment of civilization, right? They're trying to hang on to their way of life. And I found it interesting that in this last episode, and I watch it just because it's along the lines of what I do, showing ranching and helping people understand what it's about. And in this last episode, they really did the same thing that I do. I mean, they're helping this lady who's an environmentalist who has no idea how anything works in the West, why the forest fire is burning or why nobody stops the forest fire or anything like that. And they're trying to explain to her, the importance of branding, what that we do that to human babies at the same time in the hospital and things like that. And I thought that was really interesting, that because this is what my philosophy is that I think ranchers and people in this Western lifestyle, especially the lifestyle of horses and livestock and things like that, and the utilization of land in the West really have been silent because we're very we're independent, but we're like, just leave us alone. We'll do our thing. The rest of the world, do your thing. We'll provide, we'll produce food and give it to you. Just leave us alone. And that mindset has gotten us into a place where now we can't do that, because the more you sit back quietly, the more they put things out there like, oh, all ranchers now are producing so much of the climate change problem, because they're easy to blame, because they're not saying anything. So, and there's not enough, they don't feel there's enough of them to say anything anyway. So my philosophy is what I do now is really show different aspects of ranch life, um, including horse training and dealing with the relationship of someone with the horse, but then also why we move cows from here to there, how they get raised, the fact that they're not raised in factories, the fact that they eat grass, the fact that that's the only way you harvest grass is to butcher and eat beef, those types of things. And then I try to show the experience. So I try to do the work myself and then show the experience through a camera and explain it at the same time. And you said something earlier that does make this easier for me, is because I talk to myself all the time. So it's not that hard for me. I just continue to talk to myself, and I pretend the camera, I just pretend the camera is somebody that's with me, and I'm explaining it to them. And I think it's a very, it's something that we need to see more of, but it's a cause that needs to happen to preserve our land. Preserving our land doesn't come from saving the wolf or saving the grizzly bear from being hunted. That doesn't save land. What it does is it just ties up everything in litigation and costs the state and everybody else money in courts. That's what that does. People that, if you can keep the rancher's way of life going, they protect the land, because the longer they live on that land and experience that lifestyle, that land stays out of production, stays out of development is what I mean. Stays out of concrete. And so that's kind of my goal, is to help people understand before we lose it all again, the whole West to development and, kind of a playground mentality where it's like this is just should be a big state park. And before we lose it to that, I feel that it should be at least documented, but also an attempt to help farmers and ranchers be able to make enough money off their land somehow that they don't have to sell it for development. That would be the end goal. How to do that part, I'm not sure, but I'm working on it.
Sure. Well, I think that you bring up some very good points. One, like my kids show Brahma cattle, and as we go to all the national shows and that stuff, and I am pretty astounded at even these kids that are raised around cattle, how little they know about the actual cattle business. like we're
Right.
doing Brahma, which you probably don't have very much interaction with.
No experience with Brahma. No.
Yeah. But
right.
but their predominant use is in crossbreeding. They really, the seed stock aspect of them is more or less useless. They've been surpassed in terms of meat and other stuff, and even if that's not technically true, the marketing perspective battle there has been lost long time ago.
Right.
But the kids are always touting these kind of same myths and mysteries, and they don't get to the reality of what that cow really is and its true purpose in the marketplace. Just like I don't think most people realize that, even a lot of cow people, that when you sell calves at the end of the year, that those calves don't go to a feed yard, that they go out on wheat pasture or something, and they got to grow another 4 to 6 months before they're old enough to put in the feed yard and get on cord. And there's like a whole section of the life cycle of the cattle that people are selling that they're not aware exists, because we don't slaughter 600-pound calves. We slaughter 1,100-pound calves, and so they don't just get there in 3 months because you put them on corn magically. So that's
Right.
kind of some of the stuff I want to talk with you about, and maybe for the general public, we'll outline what that cycle for the typical cow is, and so forth, and maybe some of the alternatives that ranchers can look at for making more money. I know it's becoming more and more common down here in the Southeast to do cooperative grazing. So what I mean by that is, like, they may have, we're in a very different acreage per head situation than y'all are. In most of the Southeast, it's going to be about 1 to 2 acres will sustain a cow, but you can also graze a goat or a sheep with the cattle, and they don't eat the same things. And so you can really diversify what you have on the same amount of acreage, that land utilization you were talking about. And maybe the cattle just break even certain years, but everything off of the goats and the sheep is profit. And even there's a tertiary market because you tend to have livestock guardian dogs. And if you got a few of those, you can sell a litter of pups for a few $1,000s more per year, And so you have the same amount of land, but you're just using it a lot more efficiently like that. So, and I do like what you were saying a minute ago, really and truly from the perspective of the green people, the cow is kind of the ultimate, or livestock in general, they're kind of the ultimate battery because they're taking this solar energy that reaches Earth that plants magically transform through photosynthesis into carbohydrates, and then the livestock transform that solar energy from the plant into a protein source for us. And yet we get acted as though we're the sole cause of global warming and the climate change and all of that stuff. And it's just the most absurd direction that they could attack, that it seems, well, not that any lot, I'm being very inarticulate here, but not that logic has to go along with those people at all. But in reality, right, we were solar long before they ever thought about being solar, which again is something I don't think a lot of, you said it well, but a lot of people in the livestock industry, I don't think that they realize that what they really are grass farmers.
Exactly. You're harvesting your grass. And in the 70s, around here, they put up these like little tiny squares. When we're talking tiny squares on a lot of public ground around here, and like 6 feet by 6 feet, in a pyramid, so that nothing can graze that piece of ground. So you can kind of see what the ground does if it's never touched. It's very interesting to look in those little, I can't remember what they're called, but they're most often there's just dirt in there. It doesn't even grow grass anymore. It's not been trampled. It's not been, it needs to be a little bit cultivated. It's got to be eaten and tromped on and stuff. And we always forget, or a lot of people forget, before we ran cattle on this, there was millions of elk and buffalo running all over this stuff all the time. Not just a few. I mean, herds of 100,000 buffalo at once were trampling this stuff down, and it actually does better with a lot of the stuff that we see, to heavily graze it and then let it recover than let it just sit there like a lot of people do. But it's difficult because we can talk about, every time I start talking about an issue like this, I always think that's not really the issue, though. I mean, people talk about, oh, they don't want, it's overgrazing or this and that. It's almost always somebody's personal selfish ambition. They don't want cattle in a certain area. It's typically because they want it for hunting, or if they don't want, they want wolves in a certain area. I think a lot of that has to do with if they kill enough wildlife off. They're not, either they don't think about it at all. The fact that when you put a wolf out there or a pack of wolves, they're killing off way more wildlife than humans would, because they're killing them off year round, where humans are under very tight restrictions. But it's usually either out of total ignorance that that's happening, or it's the fact that they don't want humans to be involved in the food chain. They want humans to be cut out. So you're trying to eliminate a certain thing so all of these issues do have, I feel, an underlying core issue of humanity. Humans, we're selfish beings. We want to have the land for ourselves. We want to do what we like to do on this piece of land, but we don't. And so we fight against people who would even be on our side, like cattle ranchers. Cattle ranchers in the public kind of, or let's say hunters and cattle ranchers, they feel like they're on opposite sides. They're actually on the same side. They just can't see it because their own selfish ambition are fighting against each other. Hope that made sense.
Yeah. You do bring up a good point there, and I'll offer you the opportunity here to wave me off if you don't want to get into this, but animal rights versus animal welfare. So kind of what you, and I wanted to ask you a few other questions about the wolf. Like for instance, the wolves that they reintroduced, those are not the wolves that were actually there 200 years ago. Is that correct?
So that's a tough one, because anytime you talk about a species, I mean, they're all classified as the gray wolf. Not all wolves, but all the wolves in North America are classified as gray wolf. So it depends on which scientist you talk to. Sometimes scientists say there's 47 different subspecies in the gray wolf, and some say there's two. It just depends on. It's the same thing with elk or red deer, or they're all. There's conflicting information on that, but there's old photos from the 1950s when they had finally gotten rid of the wolves down here. And I'm not saying I'm for eliminating all wolves, but when they did that, they had these old ranchers and sheep herders and stuff had pictures of wolves hanging together. And there's one where there's a wolf that had come in that's way larger than the wolves that they normally would kill. So inside the subspecies of that, the wolves that were typically here, as far as I can tell from all the stuff that we have to look at, weren't the same size as the wolves that they brought in from Canada. Makes sense to me, because if you look at the white-tailed deer, let's say, the size of a white-tailed deer in Texas, the body of a white-tailed deer in Texas is half the size of a white-tailed deer here, because the further you move north, the larger animals get. I mean, typically body size. So if you're taking wolves that are up there in this larger platform, put them in here, putting them here and reintroducing them into Yellowstone was kind of not really reintroducing the wolf, but if you really want to get into the core of this wolf thing, because I've been doing more studying over the last couple weeks, and I find that the argument is, well, they were here before. So let's say it was the exact same wolf. Oh, they were here before, so they need to be here. They deserve to be here because they were before us, right? That's a big argument. The problem with that is then you're managing something based on what something used to be, which it can never be again. That would mean when the wolf was here, there was no other humans. There was just Indian tribes all over, right? There was 60 million buffalo, and who knows how many millions of elk running on the plains. I mean, we're talking the plains like eastern Montana. There was elk herds and buffalo herds all over that. None of that is there, nor can it go back to the way it was. So why are we managing? Why is our utopian thought process of management based on a non-reality that can never come again without wiping out all dams, vehicles, houses, cities, roads, fences, power, everything? Without wiping all that out, you can't manage it like that. So, but we're attempting to manage it because they were here first. Well, since it can't be like that, we need to manage them right now. Like, meaning this is what we have now, not what we used to have. This is what we can have. This is what the ground can sustain, that wildlife can be on, that ranchers are on. And we need to manage them according to that, not according to this utopian mindset of what it used to be 150 years ago, because that's not reality. You can't lump in fantasy with reality in this attempt to manage anything like that. It just doesn't work. It's like using, like, oh, I'm going to manage my life according to the Lord of the Rings books. We're just going to pretend this is Middle Earth because that's a better way to do things or something. And that won't work. You won't end up anywhere in life because you're not dealing with reality, Yep. So one more thing that I will say about the wolves is, so they reintroduced the wolves into Yellowstone in 95. And before 95, there is many, many stories of people seeing wolves coming in through the northern border of Montana, from Canada. So they were already starting to expand and move down here because Canada has been trying to manage wolves, meaning lower the population of wolves for lots and lots of time. And they're not succeeding. So they came into Montana that way. But they had to reintroduce them to Yellowstone, because if they didn't introduce them to Yellowstone with our taxpayer dollars, actually, by the way, then the states would have been able to manage those wolves however they saw fit, because they came in on their own. You can't put something on the endangered species list that came in on its own, right? But you can put it on the endangered species list and allow the federal government to tell you what to do if you introduce them to Yellowstone. And that's what we're dealing with, is we're dealing with the fact that we haven't been able to manage these wolves because they're overseen by the federal government. And that was all kind of orchestrated by whatever groups were involved in that. I don't have any idea, but that's an interesting thought process. I always wondered, why in the world did they put them in there if they were already coming into Montana in the first place? And that's why it's control of that population.
Yeah. Well, anytime the federal government decides to take over something like that, we all know that it runs so much better and so much smoother, and it also costs next to nothing. So it's really a savior kind of a thing. Yeah. So
at least it's not costing us any more money now. It's so smooth now.
We have a crane down here in South Louisiana called the whooping crane, which is this 5 foot tall, ridiculous, honking like a goose, annoying bird that went extinct. And we spent $500,000 bringing like 6 pairs of them back or something, and now they're banded and they're out there, and I'd get in less trouble for shooting you than I would if I shot one of those cranes.
Exactly.
I just kind of wonder if there might be things we could spend that money on that would be a little more productive than bringing back one of the dumbest birds that's ever been in existence. But they didn't ask my opinion before they did that. So,
well, we should have learned this lesson already from Jurassic Park. All right.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't just throw stuff back in with humans, right?
Yeah. I mean, 5,000 years ago, there were woolly mammoths roaming all of North America. Would it be a good thing if we somehow brought those back and just turned them loose and we had huge, tusked, hairy elephants running everywhere? I mean, some things went away for a reason, right?
Well, exactly. Even just speaking of like 200 years ago, we had grizzly bears all through the state of California. We had wolves over in New York and all throughout the East Coast. Should we put them back over there? Because they were here first. If you use that argument, where do you stop going back? It's kind of a fantasy argument.
Yeah, sharks in Utah, right? I mean, does Utah need more sharks, right? Because there used to be sharks there. So, yeah. That's kind of some of the differences between the animal rights and the animal welfare people. Animal rights people really want to just throw it out there and then be hands off of it, and they tend to be the radicalized groups that are actually writing all of these kinds of policies. So like right now we've had 2 major bills fighting for the last 5 years, the PAST Act and the SAFE Act on the federal level, and both of those acts were exclusively written by some of these animal rights groups, and then they have this idealistic view of the world and they throw it out there, and reality and practicality tends to not react well to that. So I'll tell you one, the PAST Act is supposedly it's the prevent all soaring tactics. It's aimed at the Tennessee Walker people and the big lick padded horseshoes and that kind of stuff. I don't know if you're familiar with that world at all, but
not much. No.
In theory, that there was a practice that went on where they would kind of blister the pasterns, and then they would put chains on the leg, and as the horse's foot comes down, the chain comes down and slams on the sore part of the leg, which makes them lift it higher, and it gives them more action, which is not something I would be in favor of. I'm not out to let's make a horse painful so that he moves in a certain way. The reality is when they go in there and they start to change around, and they did actually change this. It went to committee again this year, but in 2016, the version of the bill, they put in there, they redefined what soaring was. And the last part of the little 4-part definition was any act that could reasonably be expected to cause pain in a horse. Well, can a veterinarian give a horse a shot? Can a farrier you test for a hoof abscess? I mean, 95% of what we do in the course of husbandry with horses could reasonably be expected to cause them pain in some way, shape, or form. The head USDA veterinarian even said at one of these meetings that according to this definition y'all have written, I could see any act of riding a horse be considered an act of soaring and thus criminally illegal. And that's what we get when we let these animal rights people write these bills, and then they put a tear-jerking name on it in a Sarah McLachlan commercial or something. And if you're against it, you sound like the biggest asshole in the world. But the reality is there's stuff in there that's just absolutely ridiculous, and they're going to saddle us with it and wind up destroying the whole shooting match. So,
well, and so that's a good example of what, they don't understand anything about that world whatsoever. So they don't want to think that there's anything bad that can happen in the world. That's how people live. They live in fear of having to deal with reality. So they want to feel better about themselves. So to feel better about themselves, they throw it on somebody else while they're eating their cheeseburger, never thinking about the fact of where that came from. But they don't want to have to deal with the reality of what happens in life and death. And I shared this on a video the other day, but it's a really good example. I watched a cartoon years ago, and on this cartoon, this young kid, because they're targeting kids with this stuff, was saving a seal from a polar bear. Now, at the time, they were trying to save all the polar bears. Right, that was the big push but you're saving a seal from a polar bear, you're actually killing the polar bear. That shows your lack of understanding. Lack of understanding of what life is, how life actually functions. It's not all roses. You may be able to live removed from it, but the things that you use every day come from something dying. And if you don't kill something, then another thing suffers. If you don't kill the wild horses, if you don't manage some of the wild horses, they eat all the feed and they're starving to death. It doesn't save them. You're just creating a different problem. So, and to them, they feel like if they throw that out there, the emotional tie, and they can feel better about themselves. It's all about, I think, personally feeling good about yourself, not about the animal at all, because they haven't taken the time to learn what they're actually saving, or if they're saving anything. I mean, you save the seal one day. Somewhere on the West Coast, they rehabilitated 2 walruses or seals, and it costs somewhere around $1 million a piece or something. This is a story I heard, so it could be true or not, but they had a big ceremony right on the ocean, turned them loose after a year of this, and a killer whale came and killed them both right there in front of everybody. So you're not going to stop nature from being nature. Wolves are like some of the worst killers out there. They just start eating something from the back end once they catch it. They don't kill it. And yet this is what we want to happen, not harvesting and utilization of meat for human consumption. We don't want that to happen. We want them to die miserably horrible deaths out there in the real world. And that somehow, by saving the cute cuddly wolf, is making you feel better that you're saving something, but that's only if you neglect the reality of what's happening with the wolf.
Short-sightedness seems to plague us. This seems to be a good time to bring in our sponsor for this episode.
Great.
Trinity. I'm going to have a little trouble reading my writing, but I'll stumble through this. If I do too bad, I'll re-record it and post and plug it in here. But this episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship is sponsored by Green Soy Lentil Meat Substitute by the people. Are you a super woke vegan and want to save the animals? Does your credit card spontaneously fly out of your purse, non-binary, of course, when you hear Sarah McLachlan songs? Do you believe that all humans should be forcibly vaccinated, but animals never should? Is non-GMO, lactose, and gluten-free your mantra? If so, fight the tyrannical patriarchy and enslavement of our animal brothers and sisters by eating small portions of green soylent meat substitute. We only kill really small animals and insects and are totally sustainable and agricultural practices run by 20-somethings who can't even grow a beard yet. Don't go through don't worry, we've transferred the methane that livestock produce to your gut, which is somehow much better methane for the environment. Plus, we're getting billions from the government for billionaires behind this particular green curtain, like Bill Gates, George Soros, Al Gore, and Mark Zuckerberg. So you know you can trust us. Green soy lentil meat substitute. We definitely beat your meat. All right. So that's our sponsor for this episode.
It's a good sponsor there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We've had some past sponsors. Let's see. Alec Baldwin School of Firearm Safety has been a sponsor before. Yeah. It kind of goes like that. You know? So,
yeah.
Anyway, that might be the whole reason that I've started the podcast, is just to get to play with the sponsors writing all of those little things.
Right.
Anyway.
And you know, the thing is that if somebody, to me, if somebody wants to have a conversation with me and they are a vegan, let's say, and they want to eat vegan, I say more power to you. Go ahead, eat vegan. And you probably should be a vegan or at least a vegetarian if you're going to start talking to me about animal, not eating animals, because a lot of people get on this bandwagon, but they are eating a cheeseburger and have no idea or realize, what the process is of how that got there,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where I feel that we sometimes we get on this bandwagon of these people are just, they're so horrible and they don't, they're just mad at all of us. They want to save all the animals. They don't understand it. But that's really the truth, is sometimes they just don't understand because we haven't shown them anything that would help them understand. If I show a branding, and I pick on branding sometimes just because it's an easy example, but if I show a branding of calves without explaining why we're doing that or what the benefits are, a lot of people get upset because they see the trauma of the calf. And I'm saying trauma because there's trauma in branding. You're taking it off its mother and throwing it down and,
Mm-hmm.
sticking a branding iron on it and giving it a couple of shots. That's not comfortable, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you see the trauma, they're bawling, and the cow is bawling, and it just pulls at your heartstrings, right? Because you don't know what in the world's going on. And unless you actually explain to them that this is a calf that you can't prove that you own, if it ends up somewhere else, if somebody steals it, you have to have your mark on there to be able to say, yes, this calf here goes with this person. And you have to give those shots. Otherwise, you lose 50% of your herd to diseases. So half of them would die. And without understanding that process, then you don't understand why we put a cow or calf through that. And that's just like the beginning. The end process is that we're raising meat. So it's not like, and we want that meat to be as the least stressed that we can possibly make it. We want it to be the softest, the tenderest, we want it to have the best life possible so that it's actually good meat. And it actually, so there's not a lot of ranchers who, some people think that, there's not all good ranchers. Let's just say that. Okay.
Sure.
There's some bad ranchers out there that are jerks. And I mean, there's some bad everybody that's jerks, right?
Yeah. Plumbers, doctors,
yeah.
You've always got that lower percentage in everything you're going to see. Yes, sir.
Yeah. We're all human, right? But most of what ranchers do is try to produce the best calf possible. And that means making sure that calf has the least amount of stress in its life and is shown the best quality everything. That would be the ideal situation for every rancher, because that makes the calf worth more. So ranchers don't do these things just to hurt animals. They do them because there's a purpose, but we don't tell people that. And a lot of times we have to remind ourselves, we have to not only show what's going on, but explain exactly why we're doing it. The why is very important to these people, because if they don't know, then the emotional part of it can take over very easily. It's very hard to win an argument if you don't understand why you're having the argument, right? What your side is. It's like, oh, we just did this because our dad did it. Well, that's not a good argument. That's not going to stand up. You have to have a conviction of and an understanding of why these things are happening for the benefit of the world, for one thing, and then the calf in particular. So, yeah, I thought I'm rambling a little bit there.
No, I understand what you're saying. One of the little sayings, you haven't watched the bit video and you're not familiar with me, but sort of my purpose with that is to kill a lot of dogma and misinformation that has just persisted for generation with bits, and I have taken a very scientific approach. In fact, the video I'll be sending you, it's actually being used as an educational resource in about 25 different universities in the equine sciences and studies programs and stuff.
Cool.
But one of the sayings that I like is that traditions are for fanning the flames, not for worshiping the ashes. So those grandpas that taught us stuff, they were doing the best they could with the information that they had. But think of all of the advances and things that we physically know about horses now. I mean, those grandpas didn't have X-rays, they didn't have MRIs, they didn't have any kind of knowledge of the neurochemistry of the brain or any of that kind of stuff. And so we've added a lot of knowledge to things, and that means we recognize sometimes the picture we had wasn't complete or maybe wasn't correct at all. So that's a lot of the ways that I try to approach some of that stuff. But definitely there's pushback when you get into the traditional stuff, because you have that sentiment that's attached, and there's definitely some spade bit guys that are not a fan of me, but we'll just keep trying to educate the best we can. And I'm not at all opposed to spade bits. I don't know if you follow those types of traditions. It seems like I've seen you riding in snaffles a lot on your deal, but like from a mechanical standpoint, I actually have a background in engineering. The statement that a spade bit is not a leverage bit is, I view, a very harmful statement, because everything about the signal that bit gives to a horse is dictated on its function as a lever. Whether you actually use it to put a 30-pound crunch on a horse's jaw or not, it still is operating as a lever. And if you don't understand that, then you're going to have the mystery of why these 200 bridles all ride differently. You're never going to understand that there actually is a rhyme and a reason to the differences, and it's totally predictable and understandable and all of that stuff. Now I'm on a tangent.
That's interesting, because I ride a certain way, and I think a lot of times we feel like, if this happens in every walk of life, right? Like, this horse trainer is the way you got to follow this guy. So you got to do everything he does or you're wrong, or you got to do whatever that guy does or you're wrong. And in my life, even as a teenager, when I was doing riding clinics and things like that, attending them, I was always heavy-handed, and I've never gotten over that. So I tend to, and a lot of it is because I'm impatient. I'm not a super patient rider. I'm trying to get work done. That's what I want to do, is do the work. So I'm trying to do something quickly, which doesn't help my heavy-handedness. So what I do is I ride with something that has less impact. And that's just because I know myself. If I was a super light-handed, light touch person, I could ride a little differently with a little different headgear sometimes, but I don't want to, because just because of that, sometimes I end up a little bit too hard on their mouth. So
sure. Well, I really appreciate the and my background with horses is in cutting horses. We all talk about all the time about how it's good to give a horse a job. One of the things that I find as I do clinics and travel around and stuff is that there's a tremendous number of horses out there that have no, what I call, right now in them whatsoever, because they've never had a job. Time was never of the essence. And that's one of those things that cattle automatically, working cattle off of a horse, automatically brings into the picture, because now you have a target that stopped or moved or whatever, and you have to
Right.
react to it right now. And there's really no other thing that we do with horses that brings that into the picture. So I think
And
anybody.
I'd
Go
like
ahead.
to say something about that, but I got somebody knocked on my door here. Hold
Oh,
on just a second.
sure. I think you're muted. I'm
There
seeing.
we go.
There we go.
I hit mute
Okay.
somehow when I bumped with my coffee cup here. What were you saying? I'm sorry.
I was talking about how horses that work cattle,
Oh,
you
that's
kind of
right.
get that right now aspect in them.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of horses. So my dad runs a horse leasing business, so you have to buy and sell a lot of horses, and horses don't stay the same all the time, right? They change. They one day, one year they're good, and then they can develop a problem that makes them not good for what we need them for, right? Horses are all different that way, and you can see when a horse has been used for something that has not ever given him or her the ability to work. A lot of times you'll even no matter how broke they get, they are bored. You can see a horse has absolutely been bored so much that they kind of give up on you a little bit. And it's amazing when you work cows with something or ride them in the mountains for a purpose, like they have to go from here to there, or they get to, you have to get somewhere quickly, or you can see that life start to get back in them. That it's amazing to watch a horse come to life and I think it's because they don't know what to expect. They're so used to when they see the same thing every day. And sometimes it doesn't even take that much. Just taking them outside and loping them in circles, you know, in a different atmosphere, or making them run through, lope around in timber, or, safely. I'm not talking about, somewhere
Mhm.
you can hurt yourself too bad, but what I mean is just give them a different look at something.
Mhm.
It really can bring a horse back to life that has no life. When you're working cows all the time, those horses aren't bored. There's always something, because they can't really get into a groove and just do this. They have to pay attention to every aspect of what you're doing, or they're not in it.
Mhm.
So I think it's really good for them to work, especially in challenging terrain like the
Mhm.
Rocky Mountains. I think that adds another thing. They got to watch out for the tree and you too. And, you know, have you
Yeah.
seen some of those videos where I go through the really thick timber, and there's an interesting thing that the horse's head is actually about 3.5, 4 feet ahead of you. So sometimes they think they can get through something because they'll stick their head through it. But I'm still up here, and they don't realize that. So sometimes you really have to watch that, or they can peel you off on a branch pretty fast.
Yeah. We have very little varying terrain. Like Louisiana's pretty flat. We've got some forest and hills, but nothing like what y'all have over there. I'm quite envious of the terrain that y'all have. Although I guess there's trades and everything. But
Well, like, exactly. There's always a trade in something. But so
yeah.
I want to just to warn you here. I have an appointment, so I'm gonna have to leave at about 11:50 my
Okay.
time,
So
if
another
that's
20
okay.
minutes or something.
Yeah, I gotta go pick up a horse and so I'm doing a ride. I was gonna do it on a Tuesday, got a little under the weather, so I didn't do it. But I'm doing a ride for so my son came up with this idea, because I have a YouTube channel, that when I hit 100,000 subscribers, I have to do something special. And
Hmm.
I said, well, what would that be? And he's 12, so he says, well, you can ride like 100,000 miles. I'm like, no, no, no,
Four
no.
times around the earth.
Yeah, I would never get done with that. But anyway, I said, well, that's not a bad idea. What about if I ride 100,000 feet for every 100,000 subscribers? So that'd be 18 point, and it's about 19 miles basically. So I'm going
Hmm.
to start on one side of the mountains here in the wintertime and ride over the mountains back to my dad's place. And that's about 19 miles. And which take, when you're going through the mountains, you can't really average real good speed.
Hmm.
So it's going to take me about 8 hours, maybe 9 hours. When right now we have about 8 hours of daylight. So it's going to be from daylight to daylight. Should be interesting. It's not like horribly adventurous, but the second one, when I get to 200,000, and that's 38 miles. So start stepping up from there.
Hopefully
that's
you
not
do
in the
it in
middle
the
of winter.
summer.
Yeah, I'm thinking summer would be a little better than this. But.
So do y'all have like no-go areas in the wintertime where just snow gets too deep or it's too dangerous or any? I mean, I'm a neophyte when it comes to snow, so I would have thought crossing the mountains on a horse in the middle of winter in Montana was probably a can't do sort of a situation unless you have a very specific route that maybe you can, but you sure just don't go where the hell you want to go. Is that not true or what?
No, that's true. So for some reason, these last few storms kind of missed. They hit the mountains a little bit right behind us, but they didn't hit it any harder than they hit the bottom. Usually they dump a bunch on the top and not as much at the bottom, but they dumped kind of the same amount. So I'm going to stay on trails. That hunting season was just got over here. So I'm going to stay on trails where people have driven. So there'd be 2-track roads. They're all closed now. But that way I know I have a path through them. There isn't enough snow to really worry about at the moment anyway. But if I wait too long, we'll get 3 feet in the mountains, and then 18 miles of plowing through that with a horse. They can do it for 5 miles, but that's a lot of work if you've ever tried to walk through knee deep snow for any distance at all. So the main issue right now is cold and ice. So slipping around, they can really get to slipping, especially on these roads that have been driven on a little bit, and then now they have some snow on them because they haven't been driven on again.
Y'all do borium shoes or anything like that for traction control, or?
Yeah. So I'm actually just gonna split it up to 2 horses, just so I can do it a little bit faster because I don't want to do half of it in the dark. A horse can do 19 miles, no problem. But when it's slick, it's got I got to ride up into the mountains and then down out of the mountains. So the first 5 miles is all uphill, and they just start going a little slower at the end of that.
Sure.
By 19 miles. So I'm going to have another horse waiting for me at about halfway. Now I'm going to get him shod today with sharp shoes and pads. So the sharp shoes is the drill tech, but it's kind of like borium, only it's a little rougher, so it grips snow pretty well, or ice pretty well. And then you have to have a pad in the shoe on the foot to make sure that the snow doesn't build up, because otherwise the snow will build up and the sharp part of the shoe doesn't contact anything. So then you're just skidding around on balls. And my dad has had his leg shattered by a horse falling on the ice. And so it's something you don't want to mess with.
Yeah, fatigued horse on ice with slippery situation. That's probably a risk that's just not worth taking unless you have to. Yeah,
so. Exactly. In steep country, so there's some steeper areas. So that's what I'm going to do this afternoon. I got to go get the shoes on that second horse. At least I'll have a fresh horse for the second half, and that should make it go a little faster. So I'm back somewhere near dark. I can't film after dark anyway, so it doesn't help me.
So how many horses do you typically keep around the place?
Well, see, they all belong to Dad. So I've never really had to have very many horses because Dad's got so many of them. Doing the business that he does, I've always had 1 or 2, but
you're tuning up his problems for him still. Huh?
Yeah. So right now he's got about 120 or 130 somewhere in there at home that he's feeding. So not all those would be any good for what they're a little slow, most of them, because they're dude horses. They're meant for like guest ranches and stuff, but. I do know a couple of them. I'm riding the young one that I've been riding for my videos, and he's got plenty of life. And then the one I'm going to use for the second half, he walks really fast. So I used to ride that one until he got too good, and then he's been leased out ever since. So,
Well, how many I guess how many acres are you managing right now, and how many head of cattle are you running on it?
So we we don't run very many cattle. All the stuff that we do with cattle is basically for the, helping ranchers out.
Okay.
My dad has about 20 or 25 or 30 that we run with the horses, and he's only got about 350 acres there, which is desert, so it doesn't produce a whole lot. You just end up feeding a lot of hay. But there's a lot of ground around here, a lot of places to ride, a lot of people that need help. So I end up, I can ride as much as I want to. That's for sure. As long as you're a good hand and, don't get in the way.
Yeah. I was pretty surprised in one of your videos to see you pointing out that you basically are living in a desert and that there's even cactus on the ground. I certainly don't think of cactus when I think of Montana. So that's kind of neat to get that point of view in your videos there.
Yeah, you want to be really careful where you kneel down. Yeah.
I can imagine. So
there's a lot of cactus. Yeah.
I mean, I guess you think of cactus and you think of hot places, Arizona or something like that.
Right. Right.
Yeah. One of the videos that I really liked that you had done was kind of on ranching etiquette. And that can be a complex subject. When I was apprentice horse training, I moved around the country a decent bit. And one of the things that I noticed was that the rules were not the same everywhere. And another thing that I noticed is that nobody really took the time to explain the rules to you. You just stumbled into it, looked like an idiot, and then you would get cussed or something like that. And they would, because you hadn't divined from the air around you that this was going to offend someone in this particular.
Exactly.
So in your part of the world, what is the etiquette like up there?
It's a lot of different things. And, since I've been doing videos enough, now I'm not sure I really realize it, but I understand that when I say something, I try to explain what it was I just said, because I used a bunch of terms. You were using the term green earlier. And, we associate, or the rest of culture associates green with somebody who's into, windmills and wants to, use solar and all that type of green, like green planet sort of a thing. Well, in ranching terminology, we use green as somebody who's inexperienced. So, or a horse that's inexperienced. That's a green horse. That's a green. Oh, you're a little bit green yet. We use those kind of terms. So people wouldn't have any idea what I meant by that, especially with how they use it now. So that's one of the ones that comes right to mind. The other one that always gets people a lot is the heifer bull thing. When you talk about a heifer bull, they're like, what? Because a heifer is a cow, female, that hasn't had a baby yet. So if you say a heifer bull, which is obviously a male, then what are you talking about? And that's a heifer bull is just a bull that they use to breed heifers with. And the reason they use to breed heifers with is because that's their first time having a baby. So you want the calf to be smaller. You want the calf to have small shoulders so they come out easy, and a little bit lighter birth weight. So you would call that a heifer bull. And so those kind of things always come into play.
One of the things that I noticed, I got loaned out a decent bit whenever I was training horses as an apprentice. And one of the things that I always found just head scratching was, you show up at a ranch at 4:30 in the morning or something, and everybody unloads, and you go start making the circle. And a lot of times I'm in a pasture I've never been in before. I don't even know what direction the pins are, and
right.
You're out there in the dark, and nobody ever bothers explaining anything. You're just kind of supposed to. I always thought that, man, if we just took a stick in the dirt and spent 5 minutes, kind of drew a little map on the ground, and this is here, and never did I come across a place. And one of the etiquette things is that as when you're the young new guy, you don't open your mouth and offer advice about how something is supposed to go, right? You're supposed to just sit down, shut up, and follow.
You just figure it out.
Orders.
You just try to figure it out as you go.
Yeah, exactly. But man, like it's hard to pin cattle when you don't know what direction you're supposed to drive them. That can be a tricky situation.
Well, this has not gotten any better. Okay, this thing is something that ranchers, especially, at least as far as I know, ranchers are one of the worst communicators that I know, because they don't communicate. They expect you to know what they mean without saying it, and it's very difficult. If every one of them's different too, but
Mhm.
this is a pretty common thing. I mean, where you show up, I just find that I tend to just ask an abundance of questions, so many questions, probably drive half of them nuts. But I want to know where I'm going. I'm like, so did you mean to go around this pen here this way, or did you mean to go around the pen that way? Because what you just said didn't tell me a thing.
Yep. A few more details would be rather helpful here.
It sure
Um,
would. Yes.
do y'all use dogs very much up in that part of the world, border collies or anything like that? Or
Lots of my friends do. It's interesting. We deal with wolves a little bit, so we don't want the cows to be so. We want them to fight the dogs a little bit, which makes it harder to work them with dogs.
Mhm.
So you got to use dogs sparingly, especially in the mountains, because if you get the cows on the fight, you're using the dogs too hard too early, they'll start to where they're always looking for the dogs, and they're not looking to where you want them. They won't line out and start traveling. And you can make a nice, 2-hour trip into an 8-hour trip pretty fast if those cows are always watching you and running back and looking for the dogs and looking for their calf and bawling, and that you can't get them to go up a hill because they're, running back past you. And so dogs are like an incredible tool if you use them correctly. Like when you're got a cliff beside you and there's a cow down there in the creek, and there's no great way to get your horse down there, you can send a dog down there and get him back up on the trail. That kind of
Mhm.
thing is worth a lot, but you have to have dogs that you've worked with a lot, so they're not always pestering the cows the whole trip, and then know when to not use them. you know
Yeah.
yeah.
I've definitely seen that. Good dogs can be very, very helpful. They can take the place of several men, but dogs
Hmm.
that are not fully trained and not under control can be an unmitigated disaster too. You may be fixing a lot of fence and all kinds of other things.
Exactly.
Well,
Yeah.
we have down here in the South, unfortunately, the predominant style of dog tends to be the cur dogs. I don't know if you've ever been involved in one of those deals, but they kind of just bay. So they'll pack the cattle together, but they're going to chew ears
Oh,
off and all kind of stuff. And they don't drive the cattle anywhere. They just get them in a mob, and then you have to drive the cattle. But they're not under control like a border collie. You don't tell them left, right. You kind of just turn them loose and let nature take its course. And um, a lot of times that's not a real smooth process. But
I'll bet it
yeah,
isn't. Yeah.
they're not really trained type of dog. It's kind of just all instinct. And every time I see somebody show up with a trailer and they have cur dogs in the back, I just cringe a little bit. Um, but it's the way of the world around here. So well, I know you need to get going here in a few minutes. I've certainly enjoyed chatting with you, and I appreciate you coming on. I'm sorry for the little technical difficulties we had in the beginning. That seems to be um, just part and parcel of doing this podcasting and social media and all. You're always fighting that kind of stuff in some way, shape, or form. It's kind of like cold in Montana. You just have to deal with it and know that it's just part of what you're having to live with up there, huh? So
Exactly. And the worst thing that happens though is when you find out that you missed something, like you filmed something and you're like, wow, that was the best thing I filmed all day, and then find out your camera's not on.
mhm.
That's worse. So
Yep. I've recorded entire podcasts like this 2 hours and realized that we didn't hit record in the beginning, and yep, that's
exactly.
yep,
Hmm.
yeah, but all part of it. Well, folks, look for Trinity Vandenacre on YouTube and Instagram. Are there other, are you TikToking or other
Yep.
social media platforms?
I'm on TikTok as well.
Okay,
So those three
all right,
main ones, and then Facebook under Life in the West. That's
okay.
any of those platforms.
Well,
Yeah.
we'll when we release it, we'll put links to all your stuff in the show notes and everything. And once again, Trinity, I certainly enjoy talking to you, and thank you for coming on and everything.
Absolutely. It was good talking to you.
We'll see you next week for another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I've been your host, Daniel Dolphin.